Hey everybody, my name is Mark Wolf. I discovered the grand unified theory of game design. The basic primer is in the description below, and in this video, we are going to be covering a real game lacks real-world relevance. This is a topic that we've already covered a few different ways pertaining to previous bullet points here for formal game theory. But now we're going to focus specifically on this topic and understand why a game needs to lack real-world relevance. Now, some examples that we've covered before are things like sports. We've covered Magic the Gathering being solvable. We've covered fighting games needing twitch reflexes. And these are all examples of real-world relevance impacting the competitiveness of players in the game. And the problem is this restricts the playability of players in the game. And in a game, victory needs to be dependent exclusively on the skill and action of the players. Anything that takes that out of it makes it not a game. And if something from the real world determines a player's victory, then that violates formal game theory. So just on its own, this is why this is its own bullet point, is because nothing else really addresses this specifically until you get to this point, is that you can understand that Magic the Gathering is solvable and why that's bad, but it's more important to understand the whole picture of why that's happening and what that does to Magic at every level. What it means for cards to have artificial rarity and for that to correlate to their impact in the game. And this is not a game design choice. This is a business plan. This is a business strategy. This is why Magic the Gathering isn't a game, because it's not designed even to be a game. It is designed to be a business. And you can see that that can be very successful. But the question is, how much more successful would it be if it was a real game? How many more players would it have? How much more collectible would it be? How much more valuable? How much more in total value would all of the collections across the world of Magic the Gathering cards be worth if Magic the Gathering was a real game? And I think all of those things are much better than currently, which is kind of staggering. But in scale, a very interesting way to think about this is the concept of sports. So in professional sports, there is a very high physical bar to clear just for entry, let alone to be competitive within that meta. And it's interesting to think that if there was no real-world relevance to sports, that everybody could play them, and everybody could be, or everybody could have equal competitive potential. But that's obviously impossible the way that, sports are designed. What you have there is a game. And this would be sort of, an ideal, I don't even know if it's important to go over this example, but just, like an ideal sport where everything else was correct. It followed everything else in formal game theory, but then it violated that one aspect of the physical aptitude of the players determining how competitive they are. And I don't know of any specific examples that really do that, but just for the purposes of this explanation, I guess. Now we can talk about the other part of this is it's not just how restrictive it is to players in scope, but also how it affects strategy. And when you have physical aptitude, for example, and the same thing happens in Magic too. We're about to connect these here in a moment, but when you have physical aptitude in a sport, everything that you're doing is addressing those physicalities and those metrics, and everything you're doing is trying to maximize those. It's not always about exactly how good your strategy is. if you can't run fast enough to execute that play, it's not successful. And the same thing is true in Magic the Gathering, when it doesn't matter how good of a player you are, if you can't afford the cards, you can't play. And it's not that Magic the Gathering shouldn't cost money. It's not that trading cards shouldn't cost money. But because it's designed that way, your strategy also then doesn't matter. It's not just that the best cards are the most expensive. It's that there are best cards. As soon as you try to play Magic the Gathering, you go through this process of having to realize that your strategy doesn't matter. You have to find what is the broken strategy, and then you have to purchase that in order to be competitive in that meta. And I'm using Magic as an example because that's the most popular trading card game. The same thing is exactly true for Pokemon, for Yu-Gi-Oh!, for every other trading card game on the market that is not Mage War. And all of these problems stem from the real-world relevance created in Magic the Gathering by its imbalance. There's real-world relevance because it's imbalanced, it's designed as a business model, and there's artificial rarity to correlate that power to the scarcity of those cards, making it so the most powerful, the most impactful strategies, the ones that they've predetermined are the ones that you need to compete, are the most expensive. It's not up to players how to value the cards. It's not up to players to create interesting strategies. Those are predetermined for them. Just in the same way in sports. Well, I don't know if it's the same way, but I understand it that these are similar factors. They're playing out the same way, is that the physicality of sports predetermines a lot of what you have to do, specific things that you have to do. You can't really have as much customization of strategy in sports some cases because there's only one answer to something, because it's more a matter of physics. It's entirely real world dependent. It's not just real world relevant. In a sport, it is real world dependent. And now I guess maybe to pull that over to the video game side, we see how that affects fighting games. So when you're playing a fighting game, like if you're a competitive Tekken player, all of the things that you're doing, or the same thing is true for like Super Smash Bros. This is really, that may be more salient to my audience. Super Smash Bros. You have to learn such precise timing. You have to have such like pre-programmed muscle memory, twitch reflexes to pull off all of those different moves at just the right time, in just the right scenario, in just the right sequence. And you're not practicing the execution of strategy. You're not practicing playing. You are actually having to build muscle memory before you can even be competitive. And the physics and the twitch reflexes that are required to play these fighting games predetermine a lot of what you do. There is no customization of strategy, or let's say there's a partial customization of strategy, and this is where it's lacking, is that if you don't have the ability to accommodate your lack of physicality with a different strategy, then you are basically like forced out of the game. The game predetermines that you can't play it. There's no strategy that you can play for your style in that game, because the game cuts it off at physicality, cuts competitiveness off at physicality. And this is where fighting games have a lot of room to grow in design, and this is why I think in a previous video, I brought up the Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 example. This might have also been true in number 1. Number 2 is weird. I don't think anybody likes that game, but number 1 and 3, it's a 3D fighting game, so you can pivot, you can move like on the, is it x-axis? I don't even know, but kind of like Tekken, where you can, or like Soul Calibur, where it's not just like a single plane. You can move around and you can dodge projectile attacks to the side. And some of the action in the game is very fast, but it's not so fast that you can't react if you're not, like a competitive fighting game player. And there are some things that are just strictly twitch reflexes. There's one mechanic, I think it may be the grapple mechanic, where it basically pits the two players against each other to see who can press the A button the fastest for like 5 seconds or something like that. And that's a terrible mechanic. That instantly contrasts with the more well-paced punch, kick, and projectile action. The actual speed the projectiles travel is slow enough to be able to dodge. The kicks and the punches don't happen in such rapid succession that you can't form a strategy, form like a defensive response to it. And I'm not saying that, fighting games need to go down to like turn-based combat or anything like that. But I think there is quite a bit to be said for a simple solution like that, just to slow down the physics a little bit of fighting games and to make the mechanics a little simpler. And also, of course, like I've talked about before in customization of strategy, is actually giving players the ability to customize their fighters. I think fighting games have a lot to learn from RPGs in that regard. Is like, when I go up to an arcade cabinet in a fighter game, it would be really cool if I could, like Initial D, where you could, where it would like print out an Initial D card for you to keep track of your car, and you could update the card when you played the game, and so every time you played, you could, punch in your card. That would be really cool in a fighting game if you could like have your fighter on a card and you could customize it. And every time you played, if you wanted to play your fighter, you could just bring your card. And something as simple as that. Like, I don't know why, if a fighting game like that exists, sounds like something in Japan. I would really love to know about it. If anybody knows about an arcade cabinet fighting game like that, I would love to do more research on that and figure out, how that works, what they did, how that game plays, see footage of it. I would love to hear more, but I've never heard of anything like that. And I mean, that definitely goes beyond our discussion of lacking real world relevance, going back to our discussion of customization of strategy. But I just sort of wanted to round out that idea, because, when you say take twitch reflexes out of fighting games and then you don't give anybody what to replace that with, I think it's not as conducive to discussions, and especially down to the comment section, where I already know I'm probably going to catch a lot of flack for what I'm saying. But and actually, so now that we're talking about that, so there have been some comments, or actually at least one comment section discussion thing, where we were talking about fighting games, and there have been some other YouTubers talking, who've been talking for years, of course, about fighting games and competitiveness, things like that, and different game mechanics that they like or don't like for fighting games. And I've checked a lot of them out, but yeah, I still haven't really seen any fighting game that gets even close to what would be something that would be theory compliant. So there's still a whole lot of work. And I think as soon as somebody designs something like a real fighting game, it's going to be so vastly different that people will immediately take notice. And of course, it'll be very, very fun. Of course, if they've gotten the theory correct. So somebody go please do that. I would love to play a real fighting game. The other kind of real world relevance that we could get into, and I'm really thankful now that I've been able to keep the topic of solvability sort of to the side for the next discussion here. But the other types of real world relevance that we're going to talk about later coming up here is in lacking simulation. So we're going to keep this topic for its own discussion. But the part that I'll connect here is there's a lot of things that can happen in a game that are only justified by simulation. There's no game value in it. It's only in there for simulation because the game designer was like, oh, well, it happens. That's how it is in the real world. I got to put it in here. And what this does is it creates real world relevance situations that just shouldn't be in the game. And some of these problems that come up are in a lot of like first person shooters. Some people kind of try to view these things as game mechanics, but to me it's very clear it's just because they've never seen a proper solution. They've never seen it done right. And so in their minds, you know, it's one of those things like where, well, if somebody hasn't done it yet, you know, it can't be done. Everybody's already tried everything. And it's like, yeah, that's just not true, you know? So like some of the things that I'm talking about are like when you're in a first person shooter and you're having to deal with reloading mechanics. And the argument is made that, oh, well, this is for fairness, you know, this gives like a trade-off. This is, you know, like this is part of the balance, is that you can only shoot so much and then you have to wait. And while you're doing that, you can't, you know, shoot that ammo, or you have, you know, certain amounts of ammo that you can run out of. And like sometimes this is interesting, but unless you can actually justify that without taking agency away from the player, then you shouldn't be doing it, because all you're doing is just creating an instance where the player has to stop playing the game. And this is where the real world relevance is causing a problem in the design. And here that violates agency. So like I said before, you have to look really closely at these mechanics and make sure that everything is theory compliant. This is one of those situations where the solution is not easy or obvious or simple. You need to kind of rework that mechanic to be something that gives control to the player. In a previous video, I've suggested the mechanics for something like a cooldown to be adapted to a build up. I guess just in terms of like things not to do, some of the things that I, you know, would address if I was designing an FPS game very specifically was trying to make it so there wasn't a reload capacity on weapons. I guess a holding capacity isn't bad, just with how you do that mechanic. So if I was going to give an ammo capacity to a weapon, then I would give the player the ability to control how fast they replenished their ammo or how much ammo that weapon carried. That's the kind of solution that you'd want to look for. And this is because what you're doing, and this is really what I want to make clear here for game designers, you're designing a game. And I will definitely be repeating this in the a real game needs to lack simulation video coming up. But you are designing a game. Everything in it needs to have game value. These are game mechanics, not reality mechanics. You can use physics in your game. Certainly you can have, you know, like a 9.8 meters per second squared gravity, you know, constant or whatever. That's not a constant, just a rate of gravity, or I don't know how to word that. It's been a while since I've studied physics. but I do know that is Earth's gravity. But if something like in a cartoon, if something needs to be funny in a cartoon that violates physics, a cartoon animator isn't going to uphold physics. They're going to break it to make the joke. That's the kind of mindset you need to have as a game designer, is guns in a real world may have, magazines that have a specific capacity. There may be a certain speed at which you can reload a gun, and all of these other things like, rate of fire for a specific model or something that you're trying to replicate. And all of these things have metrics in the real world that are, you can look them up and you can simulate them in physics engines, in, digital environments. But those things have no game value. Your job as a game designer is not to simulate reality. It is to design a game. And a game needs to lack real-world relevance. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about here, I may end up having to do some follow-up videos because this is definitely a much bigger topic than just one video. But the other one that I've talked a little bit about before, but I'm going to address here as part of this topic, is memorization. That's another thing. And for things like chess, for things like Mario, for things like Zelda, for things like Metroid, for Castlevania, every single not game that requires, instead of having strategy, to memorize sequences, game states, and I guess also in chess's case, just being just straight solvable, but having to do a lot with memorizing game states and moves and things. All of these things are memorization. All of these things are real world relevant because in order to succeed, again, you're not using strategy. There's no competition value. There's no game value. It is exercise. And if you want to call that a mental exercise, you can do that. You can call chess a mental sport. You can call Mario a memory exercise. But none of these things are games. Whether in Magic, if the game is solvable and takes out strategy because it's imbalanced, and it means that the most competitive strategies are not only predetermined, but also extremely expensive, then it violates a whole bunch of things, but the cost part is violating real-world relevance because now it's pay to win. Every trading card game on the market, except for Mage War, because it's the only balanced trading card game, every other trading card game is pay to win. It can be solved. And being pay to win means that it does not lack real-world relevance. And the same things are true for sports. Skill no longer determines victory in sports because your physical aptitude determines victory. That does not lack real-world relevance. And the same thing is true for Mario and chess. In Mario, if you had not memorized everything beforehand, then you would immediately fall into the real-world relevance of needing twitch reflexes. So the only way to succeed in Mario is to have twitch reflexes so good that you can get it on your first run, or to play it long enough that you build muscle memory for where all those twitch reflexes are needed to get to the end. And that is where we will end this discussion, because there's a whole lot of topics that we still need to cover, but I think that's a good closing point. That kind of neatly ties up these topics. And let's see here, next time, I guess that means we are getting into a real game cannot be solvable, which we've left a few good segues for. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. If you have any thoughts, please put them in the comments. Questions, please, if you have any critiques, do your due diligence ahead of time. I know there's a lot of emotional people out there that are going, or that have already and are going to want to comment certain things. And I, for you, I don't know what to say, but everything is very transparent on this channel. The grand unified theory of game design is in the description of every lesson video here. I am giving very extensive examples for all of these topics. I'm explaining everything very clearly. I am sticking to all of the same explanations. Everything is consistent throughout. And this is an entirely open forum for discussion. Everyone is free to comment. Everyone is free to do their own research. Everyone is free to confirm, or everyone is free to test everything I'm saying and confirm it, or find that it's not true for themselves. And if you find something isn't true, please comment it. There are a few comments out there that just want to make ad hominem attacks without actually providing any sound or barely even valid counter arguments. There aren't really any counter arguments, and it's very irritating. It's very, tedious and just boring. I don't know. It's, so much work has gone into this. I mean, I've been designing games for over 20 years, and I've been doing this ongoing research for over 4 years now. So a whole lot has, gone into this, and for someone to just, jump in middle of the discussion without having watched any of the previous videos, or even, barely looking at the theorem itself, or even considering things, just want to post ad hominem attacks. Not to mention the appeal to authority fallacies that have come up, the straw man fallacies, probably a few others too, but I get very tired of these things, and I just don't have time for it. So yeah, anybody doing that, I'm just going to kick you off the comments section. This is not the place for that. So please stick to the scientific method. Please go look up the basics on formal logic, understand argument structure, understand the meaning of sound, valid, true, and false, and have a good day.